My name is Clarisse Dalton, and I've spent most of my adult life behind a bench, listening to lies unravel. You'd think I'd be immune to cruelty by now, but nothing hardens you quite like the kind that comes wrapped in a silk dress and a sister's smile. The engagement party was grand. Crystal glasses clinked beneath soft chandeliers, and music hummed from a string quartet in the corner. Her fiancé's family was everywhere. Perfect teeth, perfect posture, perfect ignorance. And then there was me, the older sister no one bothered to introduce properly, the one they called quiet, as if that were an insult. I arrived on time, dressed in understated black, just as I always do in court. And as I crossed the room toward the champagne table, my sister looked me straight in the eyes, tilted her head ever so slightly, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that welcomes, the kind that says, "You're not supposed to be here." She leaned into her friends, whispered something behind her hand, and they all turned to glance at me, curious, amused, dismissive. I didn't flinch. I've heard murderers try to charm a jury. I've watched families crumble under the weight of one bad decision. But that night, standing under the soft glow of chandeliers and judgment, I realized something else. The worst betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who know exactly where to aim. People often assume that silence means weakness, that if you don't fight back, you must not have the strength. But the truth is, some of us learned early on that being invisible was safer, cleaner, easier to survive. Growing up with Camille meant learning how to make myself small. She was the bright one, the charming one, the one who knew how to tilt her head just right to get what she wanted. Our parents doted on her like she was made of porcelain and gold. "Your sister has such a way with people," they'd say, usually after she'd gotten out of trouble with a quick lie or a perfect pout. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the serious one, the too intense child who read in corners and corrected teachers. By the time we were in high school, Camille had already decided I was boring. She'd host parties I wasn't invited to, tell people I was adopted from the library, and mock the way I dressed. At the dinner table, our parents laughed along. "Clarisse just doesn't know how to let loose," Mom would chuckle. Dad never looked up from his plate. No one ever asked me what I wanted to be. No one cared where I went after school, as long as I didn't cause problems. So I didn't. I studied. I disappeared into textbooks and case law. I learned how to dismantle arguments without raising my voice. While Camille chased college boys and botched her communications degree, I graduated early and got into law school without a single cheer from home. When the acceptance letter came, Camille rolled her eyes and said, "So you're gonna be one of those courtroom women with no life, huh?" I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. After graduation, I moved across the state, clerked for a federal judge, prosecuted white-collar crime cases until my name began to mean something in the legal community. I was appointed to the bench at 38, the youngest in my district at the time. The newspaper wrote about it. My name was on the front page of the Metro section, just below a photo of me standing in front of the courthouse, robe in hand. I sent a copy to my parents. No one called. The silence from them wasn't shocking. By then, I had learned the difference between distance and peace. It didn't hurt the way it used to. I had my courtroom, my chambers, my life. I wore my title like armor and used my voice to cut through the nonsense of liars and petty grievances. In court, people listened to me. In my family, I was still just the older sister. I only saw Camille a few times after that. Weddings, birthdays, the occasional holiday where Mom begged us to pretend we were still close. She'd show up in sequins and stilettos, always with a new story about how exhausting her social life was. I'd sit at the end of the table, watching her perform, wondering how someone could be so full of noise and still say nothing that mattered. We hadn't spoken in over a year when I got the invitation. It was a glossy white envelope with rose gold trim, scented, of course, with some cloying floral perfume. Inside was a card that read, "Join us in celebrating the engagement of Camille Dalton and Jonathan Pierce." There was no mention of me on the invite, no +1, not even a handwritten note. Then came the text, "Hi sis, just FYI. Don't feel like you have to come if you're busy. Jonathan's family is a little high profile. Try not to wear anything too serious, okay? XXC. Too serious. That line stayed with me for days. She had no idea how serious I'd become. How many lives I'd changed with the swing of a gavel. How many men in $1,000 suits had called me Your Honor, with trembling voices. Camille still thought of me as the girl in second-hand clothes, clinging to books and formality. She didn't know me at all, but that was the thing. They never asked. So I bought a dress. Simple, black, elegant. Not flashy, just tailored. I booked a flight, rented a car, declined the hotel room she offered, and made my own arrangements. And then, for the first time in a decade, I walked back into the lion's den with no intention of shrinking. I wasn't going for her. I wasn't even going for them. I was going for the silence. The one that had followed me for years. And the one I was finally ready to break. The venue was a glassy hilltop estate, with manicured hedges and valet parking. The kind of place you rent not because you like it, but because you want people to know you can afford it. Camille's name was printed in gold on the welcome sign, followed by Jonathan's, in a slightly smaller font, which already told me everything I needed to know about their dynamic. I arrived 5 minutes early. Always 5, never more. I watched from the car as guests trickled in, hugging, laughing, adjusting expensive cufflinks and dresses that still had creases from their plastic packaging. Camille had always been obsessed with appearing upper class, even if her bank account said otherwise. I imagined she'd spun a charming narrative for Jonathan's family, one where she was the elegant socialite and her sister was too rigid to be relevant. And then I walked in. There was no announcement, no gasp, just a glance from the hostess who handed me a champagne flute and said, "Welcome." Her voice was polite, distant, and I could tell she had no idea who I was. Perfect. Inside, the place was buzzing. People in polished shoes and practiced smiles floated from corner to corner, circling Camille like she was the sun. I stayed near the back, sipping quietly, watching how easily everyone fell into orbit around her. She looked beautiful, I'll admit that. But beauty and character have never had much to do with each other. I caught sight of our parents across the room. My father's hair was grayer, but he still had that same passive expression he wore through most of our childhoods, present but not involved. My mother, on the other hand, was beaming, wearing a dress too young for her age and a necklace I recognized as a gift I'd sent years ago, one she'd never acknowledged. She saw me, paused, and smiled with a polite confusion, like I was an acquaintance she couldn't quite place. Then turned back to her friends. Not a word, not even a wave. I found a seat near a corner table, partially shielded by one of the oversized flower arrangements. It was better this way. They didn't want me visible, and I didn't want to be seen through their eyes anymore. Then Camille found me. She was in full hostess mode, air kisses, soft hands, fake laughter. When her eyes landed on me, something behind them tightened. "Well, look who made it," she said, voice dripping with performative warmth. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Didn't think this kind of scene was really your thing." "It usually isn't," I replied, matching her smile with one of my own. "But I had the time." She gestured to my dress with a raised eyebrow. "Black, huh? Bold choice for an engagement party." I didn't bother explaining that black was what I wore when I wanted to be taken seriously. I knew better than to offer depth to people who came only to skim the surface. "I figured someone needed to ground the palate," I said instead. She blinked, clearly unsure if I was being sarcastic. Then she leaned in and lowered her voice. "Just try not to make things awkward, okay? Jonathan's family is, they're very big on appearances, and they ask a lot of questions." I held her gaze. "Then maybe they'll get real answers." That was enough to make her laugh, loudly, theatrically, before waving it off like I'd made a joke. Classic Clarisse, always so intense. She flitted off before I could reply, already mid-giggle with someone in heels too high to walk in. I exhaled slowly and sipped my drink. There it was again, that word, intense, a lifetime of being called too much, when all I ever tried to be was enough. Jonathan approached me later during dinner. I was alone at the table, picking at a plate of smoked duck that had gone cold. He looked like a politician, tall, smooth, careful, the kind of man who shook hands with both palms and probably practiced empathy in the mirror. "Clarisse, right?" he asked. "Camille's sister?" I nodded. "That's me." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "She doesn't talk about you much. I wasn't sure if you two were close." I tilted my head. "We're sisters." He chuckled, unsure what to do with that. "She said you do something in law?" I met his gaze. "Something like that." There was a flicker of curiosity behind his eyes, but it faded. He asked nothing further. Camille had likely filled his head with some diluted version of my life. Maybe paralegal, maybe policy aide. Anything but the truth. Which was fine. Some truths are like verdicts. You don't hand them out before the trial's over. Dinner gave way to speeches. Camille's friends rose one by one, giggling through toasts full of childhood memories and compliments so sweet they bordered on syrup. It was the kind of performance that made people feel important by association, laugh in the right places, sip on cue, smile for the camera. Camille soaked in the attention like it was sunlight, her laughter floating through the room with the polish of someone used to being adored. I stayed seated at the far end of the hall, partly obscured by a centerpiece of white orchids. I wasn't there to be seen. They made it easy. Throughout the evening, I'd become a fixture, someone people passed without registering. A single woman in black at the edge of a party, meant for paired champagne flutes and pastel photo ops. A few people smiled politely. No one asked who I was, not even Jonathan's relatives, despite Camille introducing half the room with exaggerated stories about how connected she was to this person or that cousin. At one point, I overheard someone ask Jonathan if Camille had any siblings. He shrugged. "She does," he said, sipping his drink, "but they're not close." I didn't even flinch. That was their story, always had been. I was the distant one, cold, stern. Too serious. Never mind that Camille hadn't returned a birthday call in 5 years, or that I'd flown across the state for Mom's surgery and was asked to wait outside the recovery room so Camille could have space. Let them tell it how they liked. I'd lived long enough to know the difference between truth and narrative. And then Camille stood. She tapped her glass with her fork, all eyes swiveling toward her. The spotlight from the chandelier glinted off her sequined dress like a warning flare. She took center stage as if it were built for her. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she said, beaming. "Truly, I feel so lucky." The crowd smiled back. Some already had their phones raised, capturing what they assumed would be another charming speech. "I know this may come as a shock," she went on giggling, "but I wasn't always this put together." Soft laughter. Jonathan smiled, leaning back in his chair, proud. "In fact," Camille continued, "growing up, I was the wild one. My sister, Clarisse, was the opposite. She was, let's just say, very strict, very by the book." There was a pause, the kind people mistake for humility before a joke lands. "She once filed a formal complaint because I borrowed her sweater without asking. I was 13. Laughter erupted. I stayed still, my expression unreadable. "She's always been that way," Camille said, waving her hand dismissively. "Judgy, rigid. Honestly, I'm just grateful she showed up tonight. She's not big on family gatherings, or, smiling." She looked right at me, held the gaze just long enough to register, then winked. My fork rested lightly beside my untouched entree. Jonathan nudged her. "Be nice," he said with a grin. Then he turned toward me, smiling like he was part of a harmless inside joke. "But really," he added, "we're lucky she made time. I mean, Camille said you work in, what was it, county records?" I tilted my head slightly, not speaking. "Or maybe admin," he added. "Either way, sounds like important paperwork." There it was. The insult wasn't even cruel. It was worse. It was condescendingly small, an erasure spoken so casually it didn't even sting, just clarified. Camille looked pleased. Her smile stretched like a cat's, basking in the assumption that I would, as always, swallow it in silence. I wiped the edge of my glass and met Jonathan's gaze. "I'm sorry," I said calmly. "Where did you hear that?" He blinked. "Camille said something about you working in government, office work?" I didn't answer right away. Let the moment stretch. Let the pressure build where their confidence used to sit. "No," I said. "That's not correct." Camille laughed nervously. "Oh, come on! Don't be so dramatic." "She's right," I said, still looking at Jonathan. "I don't work in office administration." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm a judge," I said. The silence was immediate, thick, like the room had inhaled and didn't know how to exhale. From a table to the left, a voice broke through. "Wait, Judge Dalton?" Heads turned. Someone gasped. A woman closer to the stage narrowed her eyes. "From the Ferris decision?" she whispered. I heard it. So did Camille. Jonathan stared at me like he was seeing something under the surface of a painting, something he hadn't realized was there. "You're a judge?" he asked. But this time there was no grin, no charm. I nodded once. "Superior Court, 11th District." His hand dropped from Camille's back. "But Camille said you never really made it far, that you were—" I didn't wait for the rest. The woman in green near the bar spoke up again, louder now. "She handled the Eastman case. That sentencing got national coverage." More murmurs. Phones slipped out of pockets. Google searches launched beneath linen tablecloths. One man adjusted his tie. A woman looked sheepish as she realized she had been laughing just moments earlier. And Camille? Her face shifted. No longer confident. Not angry. Just cornered. "I didn't know she was still doing that," she muttered. "I thought she gave it up." I stood then, not abruptly, slowly, with purpose. I folded my napkin and set it gently on my plate. Every move carried weight now, not because I forced it, but because the weight had always been there. They just never saw it. I met Jonathan's eyes one last time. "When people don't ask questions," I said softly, "they shouldn't be surprised by the answers." Camille opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked at our parents, who looked just as stunned. My mother's lips were slightly parted. My father had gone pale. I walked past them all, past the shocked whispers and sideways glances and melting facades. No need for drama, no theatrics, just quiet gravity. I didn't need to explain myself. The verdict had already been delivered. I didn't stay for dessert. There was nothing more to be said, nothing sweeter than the silence I left behind. Outside, the night felt cooler, cleaner, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand attention. It just exists, steady and real. I walked to my car without turning back. No applause, no farewell. Just the sound of gravel and freedom. My phone buzzed once. Then again. A missed call from my mother. 2 texts from Camille. "You should have told me." "Why would you embarrass me like that?" As if facts were weapons, as if telling the truth, when asked, was an attack. I didn't respond. They hadn't asked who I was for years. They'd assumed, projected, reduced me to the version that made them feel bigger. And when the truth came out, they didn't feel remorse. They felt exposed. I wasn't angry, not anymore. There was a time I would have given anything to be acknowledged, to be invited into their pride. But somewhere along the way, I stopped needing that. What I built didn't require their blessing. I had earned every inch of my life, with no shortcuts, no applause, and no family name pulling strings, just work. Quiet, consistent, unglamorous work. The kind that holds weight in rooms they never entered. Inside, I imagined the buzz. Camille rewriting stories. Jonathan realizing his smugness had limits. My parents sitting quietly, unsure how to process the daughter they never bothered to understand. But I didn't need their understanding anymore. They hadn't failed to see me because I was invisible. They failed because they never looked. Now they would. And even if they never said a word about it, never admitted they were wrong, something had changed. Not because I demanded it, but because truth has a way of shifting the air. I didn't need the spotlight. I never wanted center stage. All I ever wanted was my seat at the bench. and the quiet, lasting power of finally being seen.